in this video, we'll be looking how to find out the inverse function. So we have been given simply a function which is f of x equals x over plus 1. So we are finding out the inverse function of it. That would be written, the final answer expected to be written in the form of f inverse of x. So this is the form how we write it down, the inverse function. Okay, now there are the few steps that we follow while finding out the inverse function. The step 1 is we change f of x as y. So the first step is always whatever the function is given to you, it changes in terms of y. So that would be now y equals to x over 4 plus 1. The next step you do is make x a subject. So whatever your x variable is, you make it a subject. So we're going to rearrange this in such a way that we'll be able to make x a subject. So the inverse of a plus 1 is a minus 1 on both the sides. And you'll be getting y minus 1 equals x over 4. To make x a subject, we still have got divide by 4. So the inverse of divide by 4 is to multiply by 4 on both the sides. Remember, when you multiply by 4, it needs to go with the whole bracket. This will simplify and you're going to have x equals to 4 y minus 1. Expanding out the bracket will give you x equals to 4y minus 4. Once you make x the subject, now the third step is to change x with f inverse of x and you change y with x. So now we have got this last step. This x is not going to change in terms of f inverse of x and this y is going to change as in terms of x. So that would be 4x minus 4. So the inverse function that we started, so the inverse function of the function x over 4 plus 1 is 4x minus 4. Always remember that to find out the inverse of any function, you'll be following these 3 steps. Let's have a look that we'll be doing the same thing with this example. Now, alright, so here we have got the next question now, which is g of x equals to 3 plus 2x. And what we are finding out is we are finding g inverse of x. So we are finding out the inverse function. So to find out the inverse function, again, we'll be following the same steps. The first is the g of x will be written as y. So y equals to 3 plus 2x. Step 2 is make x subject. So remember that the step 2 is always we have to make x the subject. To make x the subject, we do the inverse of plus 3, which is to do minus 3 on both the sides. And that would be y take away 3 equals 2x. Because we are trying to make x the subject, we still have got this 2 here. So we divide by 2 on both the sides. Remember, when we divide by 2 on both the sides, it needs to be with the whole thing. So we'll be having y take away 3 over 2 equals to x, because this and this would simplify. Once we made x the subject, then the last step is we do change x with whatever the function given to you is the inverse of that. So change x with the g inverse of x and y will going to replace by x. So this is the last step now here. So this y is going to change in the form of x. So that would be x take away 3 over 2 equals to, and the x is changing as g inverse of x. Or you can just write it down that g inverse of x equals to x minus 3 over 2. It's exactly the same thing. Again, we are finding out the inverse of this h function. So we are finding out h inverse of x. To find out h inverse of x, the first step is to change h of x in terms of y. So that would be y equals to 5x over x minus 1. Step 2 is, or step B is here, make x subject. To make x subject, you have to rearrange in such a way that you'll be able to make x the subject. And to make x the subject, you expand it out, xy minus y equals 5x. Take x terms onto the one side, so you'll be having xy minus 5x equals to y. You factorize x from here, so it would be y take away 5 equals to y. Because you're finding out the x value, so the x value would be y over y take away 5. So once you made x the subject, now the third step is, what you have to do is you change x with the inverse function, which is h inverse of x, and y is changing in terms of x then. So the last step is here, which you're going to do is, this x is going to change as h inverse of x, and all the y's would be written as x now. So this y is a x, and that would be, in the denominator would be x minus 5, and that's the inverse function of h. Here we have got the next example now. So we have got f of x function given in the square root form, and we are finding f inverse of x. The first step is to change f of x in terms of y. So y equals to square root x minus 2. The next step is to rearrange in such a way that you'll be able to make x the subject. So first we need to get rid of this square root. To get rid of this square root, you do the square on both the sides. So the inverse of the square root is the square. So you would have y square equals to x minus 2. We still have to make x the subject. So you do plus 2 on both the sides and you'll get y square plus 2 equals to x. Now you're to the final step now, where this x is going to change to the inverse. So that would be f inverse of x equals, this y is going to change in terms of the x, would be x squared plus 2, and that's the inverse function of f. Here we have got the last example now. So we have been given that what's the f of x function is, what's the g of x function is. We are finding out the sum of the inverse of them. So the first thing I need to do is to find out the f inverse of function. So I'm going to start with f of x, which is 4x minus 1. The first step is change f of x into the y form. So y equals to 4x minus 1. You have to rearrange now. The second step is to rearrange in such a way that you'll be able to make x the subject. So now you take this 4 on the other side. Bracket means is a product. Inverse of a product is a divide. So you'll do y over 4 equals x minus 1. Still you have to make x the subject, so you do the inverse of minus 1 is to do as a plus 1 on both the sides, and you're going to have y over 4 plus 1 equals to x. Once you'll be done with this step, you do the final step. We are changing your x with the inverse function, so that would be f inverse of x equals, and changing y in terms of x would be x over 4 plus 1. Here we have find out what's the inverse of f function. Now we're going to do the g inverse of x. So we are finding now here how to find out the g inverse of x. So I'm going to start by writing down g of x function, which is 4 bracket x plus 1. We do the first step to change g of x in terms of y. So y equals to 4x plus 1 in the bracket then. The next step is making x the subject. So you'll be having y over 4 equals x plus 1. Do the inverse on both the sides. So y over 4 minus 1 equals x. The last step is to change this x in terms of the inverse function. So that would be g inverse of x equals, this y is going to be x over 4 minus 1. Because now we are finding out the sum of them, so I'm doing the final thing over here. So we are finding out f inverse of x plus g inverse of x. We have found out what's f inverse of x is, which is this thing. I'm going to write it down, x over 4 plus 1. Then we are adding with the g inverse function, which is x over 4 minus 1. We do the simplification, so plus 1 and minus 1 will simplify. So you do x over 4 plus x over 4. Adding the two sum together, adding the two same things together. So x over 4 plus x over 4. 4 is the common denominator. You're having x and x on the top. So it would be 2x over 4. And the simplification of that would be just x over 2. So here it's so here we have done the inverse function, how to find out the inverse function, and they're the 3 main steps you'll be following for it for every question. And I hope you have found this video useful in understanding the topic inverse function. Thanks for watching the video.